What's up YouTube? Cody Bidlow with SprintingWorkouts.com and ATHLETE.X. Today we're going to cover what I see as the best approach to strength training for sprinters and other speed and power athletes. We're going to talk about the complex method and contrast training, how it works, why it's superior to traditional resistance training, and how you can start implementing it into your program right away. So when you set out to implement a training program with the intent of improving sprinting performance, it can be daunting in that there's so many ways to train. Should you lift heavy? Should you lift light and fast? Should you be doing loaded jumps, plyometrics, assisted jumps? If we think about the demands of the sprint, athletes need to be strong in order to start aggressively and overcome inertia. They need large amounts of power production to continue to accelerate, and they need great stiffness and reactive strength qualities to reach high maximal velocities and maintain them as best as possible throughout the duration of the sprint. Heavy strength training could have a great impact on block clearance and early acceleration, and it could increase our baseline capabilities to produce force, but it has less of an impact the deeper you go into the sprint. On the flip side, high velocity strength and plyometrics likely have more relevance to mid-acceleration and maximal velocity sprinting, but solely focusing on these types of training without any heavy strength training could leave you with lackluster early acceleration and leave potential force production increases on the table. If you aren't strong relative to your body weight, it's going to be harder to be explosive and powerful. In light of all this, we have to strike a balance between the different qualities needed to sprint if we want our training program to be most effective in improving sprint performance. To get the greatest transfer from strength training to sprinting, we should be using complex or contrast styles of training. Complex training does not mean your program has to be overly complicated. It just means that your training should consist of different but connected parts. Contrast training basically means the same thing in that you're using contrasting methods such as slow and fast exercises, preferably within the same superset or at the very least within the same session. For example, you can perform a back squat at a high load, such as 90% of your max, paired with a jumping or plyometric exercise like a low load jump squat, a depth jump, or a band assisted jump. That would be an example of contrast training or a complex training method. So why is complex or contrast training potentially superior to traditional resistance training? One reason is that complex training trains athletes along various points on the force velocity curve as opposed to only developing one area of the force velocity curve. If we can improve our ability to produce force at various velocities, it would lead to a superior training effect compared to only improving force production at either low or high velocities. It's been said by Charlie Francis and probably others that improving at various points along this force velocity curve positively impacts other areas on this continuum, and I believe that this is the case. Getting stronger at low velocities can help raise your capacity to produce force at higher velocities and vice versa. Along the same lines, complex training reliably improves maximum strength, but does so without neglecting other strength qualities. Here we have a quote from Effects of Complex Training on Sprint, Jump, and Change of Direction Ability of Soccer Players, a systematic review and meta-analysis. And it says, as maximal strength is strongly related to sprint, jump, and change of direction in male soccer players, improvements in maximal strength may be an additional and relevant benefit derived from complex training. Another benefit is that complex training likely causes favorable changes in muscle cells and fiber types, whereas only performing heavy, slow strength training could negatively affect muscle fiber types. From that same study, they said, Type 2X muscle fibers, which are those with greater contraction velocity, power, and rate of force development compared to Type 2A or Type 1 fibers, may be favorably affected, which means they have greater preservation, by complex training, even when compared to resistance training. Indeed, an early study reported that 19 weeks of heavy resistance training reduced the percentage of Type 2X fibers, whereas a more recent study reported a preservation of Type 2X fibers after complex training, similar to other studies that have included plyometric training or complex training. They go on to say that the combination of resistance training and plyometric training during complex training may allow the summation of cellular and structural adaptations induced by resistance training and plyometric training. So that is to say that there is an additive benefit between resistance training and plyometric training in that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. If you only did resistance training or plyometric training, your improvements would be weaker compared to if you utilized both methods in your training program. Another thing to consider is complex training likely has a better impact on coordination and movement skill compared to traditional resistance training, as you are required to perform exercises that have different demands within a short period of time. We can refer back to that study once again, which said complex training may favor energy transfer between concentric and eccentric muscle actions, providing better coordination and synchronization of active muscle groups to improve and enhance motor skills. Bo Schexnayder talks a lot about how static lifts like a back squat or bench press could cause discoordination for some athletes and interfere with their sprinting, which is one reason he pulls them out in the period leading up to competition, leaving in Olympic lifts and other more dynamic movements. If this is true that static lifts can hurt coordination, then using complex training might be one way to sort of counteract that and actually improve coordination. If we could use complex training to actually enhance rather than hurt coordination and synchronization of motor patterns, this would be a good thing. And it appears to be the case that if you do complex training, you can actually improve coordination rather than hurt it, which might happen if all you did was heavy, slow, static type lifts. So the next thing to consider is, how can we implement complex training in our sprint and strength training programs? In the gym or at sprint practice, we can use different loading methods and exercises to have our best shot at inducing changes that can lead to improvements in sprinting. We want to get stronger at various points along the force velocity curve, and our training should reflect that. Here we have a quote from a study titled "Increases in Lower Body Strength Transfer Positively to Sprint Performance, a Systematic Review with Meta-Analysis." It said, "It is, however, worth noting that the back squat combined with loaded jump squat or counter movement jump and plyometric training method displays a greater sprint effect size than the back squat and loaded jump squat CMJ training methods." So this means that combining the back squat with loaded jumps or combining the back squat with plyometrics are superior methods of training as opposed to doing them all separately or individually. They go on to say, thus, from a practical standpoint, a mixed method resistance training program, i.e. complex training, as recommended by Half and Nymphius, appears to be the optimal training strategy for improving sprint performance when compared with more traditional training methods, such as resistance training or plyometric training alone. This is in line with previous research reporting a greater improvement in athletic performance after a mixed method resistance training intervention when compared with traditional training protocols. In line with this thinking, we should seek opportunities to combine our heavy strength training exercises, such as a back squat or a bench press, with a jumping or plyometric activity. Examples in the gym could include a heavy back squat that is paired with a loaded counter movement jump, a heavy back squat paired with a depth jump, a back squat paired with a band-assisted jump, or you could combine a few exercises, such as going from the back squat into a walking box jump and finishing with a band-assisted jump. You would cycle through these exercises like a superset or a triple set and go back squat, jump, or if you were doing 3 exercises, it would be the back squat, the first jump, and then the second jump, and then you would repeat. You could also do something like a single leg RDL paired with a split leg assisted jump. You could do heavy power cleans with depth jumps, heavy power cleans with a counter movement jump, finishing with a band assisted jump. You could do heavy step-ups combined with a single leg band-assisted jump or step-ups combined with a strike jump. Now, if you wanted to do contrast or complex training in your sprint training session, you could do something like a heavy sled pull that's paired with a sprint that does not use a sled, a medicine ball throw that you follow with a sprint, a hill sprint followed by a flat sprint, a weighted vest sprint followed by a sprint without load, stiff leg hops with a med ball followed by a 20-meter flying sprint, or a 20-meter flying sprint followed by a set of jump rope. Now, before we wrap up, there are a couple different ways that you can do these contrast methods. So we're going to talk briefly about simple contrast versus a French contrast. So when you first use complex and contrast training methods, you can keep things simple by combining 2 exercises that target opposing ends on the force velocity spectrum, such as the back squat and a depth jump. But over time, you might find that you're either getting bored by just doing these 2 exercises back to back. Maybe you're starting to see your progress slow down. So that's where you could progress your contrast training by bringing in what's called a French contrast. So as time goes on, you can progress towards something like a French contrast, which uses the following setup. First, you do your main lift, which is going to be something like a back squat or a bench press, somewhere around 80 or 90% of your 1 rep max, so pretty heavy. Then you follow that up immediately with either a jump or a plyometric exercise. So that could be a counter movement jump or maybe a depth jump. You follow up that jumping exercise with either a drop set of the main lift or a weighted jump. So you could be doing something like a 30% loaded 1 rep max lift. So maybe you did the back squat first and then you take a bunch of weight off and do a back squat again, but at a much faster bar speed. Or this could be a weighted jump. So it could be something like a loaded counter movement jump. And then you would finish with a 4th exercise, which would be either a plyometric or an assisted jump. So just to repeat, it could be something like first you do back squat, then you do a counter movement jump, then you do a back squat at 30% of your 1 rep max, and then you finish with a depth jump. Alternatively, you could do a back squat, then a depth jump, then a loaded counter movement jump, and then a band assisted jump. So there's different ways that you can do this, but basically you're combining 4 exercises, each placed at a different point along that force velocity curve. We have the very slow exercise in the main lift. We have a couple exercises that are sort of in the middle, either slightly force dominant or slightly velocity dominant. And then you finish with a very velocity oriented movement like a plyometric, or at the extreme end of the spectrum, an assisted jump where a band is pulling you off the ground and you're able to move much faster than you otherwise would in any type of jump. Using a French contrast can be very stimulating and a very potent training tool, and it can make your training very time effective. Each exercise should be done for a limited number of repetitions so that each of the efforts are of high quality and high intensity. Because of the demands on your body, it would be wise to start with simple contrasts and then progress over time to the French contrast, so that way you have room to progress, room to improve, and you're not just jumping the gun and going to the most intense style of training right out the gate. You can incrementally build over time from maybe a contrast of 2 exercises, then maybe 3 exercises, and then ultimately you progress to the French contrast by the end of your preparatory period. So just to recap a little bit, complex training, contrasting different exercises in your workout, this is a great way to target both the more general qualities and then the somewhat more specific qualities that we want to see in our training program if we want to run faster. We have to get stronger. You can't neglect getting stronger. But at the same time, you don't want to pursue strength and then never do anything that is between strength and max velocity sprinting. We want to be able to use our training program to build our body in a holistic way, so that way we're competent with heavy loads at slow velocities, moderate loads at moderate velocities, low loads at high velocities, and then also the highest velocities where we're only moving our body weight, or in a band assisted jump, moving less than our body weight. So we can use contrast training and complex training to make sure that we're targeting these different qualities. And if you do that, and over time you keep progressing your lifts, progressing your jumps, and you do it in this contrasting and complex method of training, I think you can get the most out of whatever your potential is to run fast. You can get the most out of it because you're getting stronger, you're getting more powerful, you're getting competent with high velocity movements. If you choose your exercises right, you'll be developing good stiffness qualities. So I really would advise you guys to consider using this in your program. You don't have to make any drastic changes. Just start out with your main exercise of the day, add a jump or a plyometric that is relevant, but that serves a slightly different purpose than that main lift. See how that goes. Over time, maybe you go from doing 1 contrast in your workout to maybe 2 separate sets of contrasts. So like yesterday, for example, I started out with a heavy back squat that I paired with a band assisted jump. And then I went into a single leg RDL, which is a much lighter exercise. It's a faster velocity, but then I paired that with a band assisted split leg jump. So I was still doing a contrast, even though the first exercise and the first contrast I used was very heavy and very fast. Then I went to sort of middle of the road on load with the single leg RDL, a more of a stretch shortening cycle type movement, paired that with a band assisted jump. So that way I was targeting both bilateral, single leg, split leg positions. I was targeting high velocity, high load, moderate velocity, moderate load, and I did all that within the first half of my workout. So give this a shot, try it out. I think it'll help you guys, and I'd love to hear your thoughts. Maybe you've already used this, maybe you've had successes with it, maybe you've had some trouble with it, but whatever the case, I'd love to hear your guys' opinion. But that's it for now. So I will catch you guys next time. This is Cody Bidlow with SprintingWorkouts.com and ATHLETE.X signing off.